When 17-year-old Lily Carter and her best friend Marcus Hill arrived at the Florida Zombie Festival, they expected costumes, laughter, and chaos. What they didn't expect was to stumble into a nightmare that would turn the entire town into a crime scene. The Florida Zombie Festival had always been a spectacle unlike any other. Each year, the small coastal town transformed into a chaotic carnival of the undead, where thousands of visitors roamed the streets in tattered clothes and gory makeup, pretending to stagger and moan like zombies. For locals, it was a beloved tradition, a chance to see friends and neighbors in outrageous costumes and to experience a community coming together in celebration. Tourists from neighboring cities arrived early, eager to witness the elaborate parades, street performances, and the sheer spectacle of it all. Vendors set up stands selling everything from brain-shaped cupcakes to glow-in-the-dark masks, while bands played energetic music that carried through every street and alley. The atmosphere was electric, buzzing with excitement and anticipation. The festival had a reputation for being loud and wild, but it had always been safe. Families attended during the day, while teenagers and young adults thronged the streets at night. Colorful banners fluttered in the warm Florida breeze, and fog machines and strobe lights added an eerie, theatrical effect. The scent of fried food mingled with the salty ocean air, drawing people to carnival rides and food stalls. Everywhere you looked, zombies of all shapes and sizes mingled with regular festival goers, creating a surreal mix of horror and celebration. The energy was infectious, with people cheering, laughing, and snapping pictures, capturing memories that seemed suspended in time. This year, however, there was a subtle shift in the air. While the majority of attendees were still enjoying themselves, there was a feeling of unease that no one could quite explain. Reports of small disturbances began trickling in: minor thefts, lost children, and people behaving strangely. Police were present as usual, patrolling the festival grounds and keeping an eye on the crowds, but their usual presence felt heavier this year. Street performers roamed with unusual intensity, and shadows seemed to linger longer than they should in the corners of alleys and abandoned lots. Most people dismissed these things, attributing them to the overwhelming crowds and chaotic energy of the festival. But for those paying attention, there was a faint, creeping tension that hinted at something more sinister beneath the surface. As night fell, the festival took on a different character. The bright sunlight was replaced by flashing lights, eerie fog, and the sound of pounding music that seemed to reverberate through the entire town. The crowd swelled, pushing people together in tight, energetic clusters. Costumes became more grotesque, makeup more elaborate, and the line between pretend horror and reality blurred. In the dim glow of the festival lights, alleys and side streets seemed to take on a life of their own, offering both excitement and danger. People laughed and screamed as they navigated through the chaos, unaware that in the shadows, someone was watching, calculating, and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. What had always been a place for harmless fun now carried an undercurrent of unpredictability. The festival's charm had always been its unpredictability, the surprises, the pranks, the sense of being somewhere outside the ordinary. But this year, that unpredictability felt different, more dangerous. There was an invisible tension threading through the crowd, a sense that the festival had become more than a celebration. It had become a stage for something that no one could have anticipated, a darkness hidden beneath the laughter and music, ready to emerge in the most horrifying way imaginable. By the second day of the festival, the energy was at its peak. Thousands of people had crowded into the streets, moving between food stalls, photo booths, and makeshift stages. The music pulsed through every corner of the town, mixing with the excited chatter of visitors. Children dressed as tiny zombies held hands with parents, while teenagers ran through the streets in elaborate costumes, laughing and shouting. It seemed like nothing could go wrong in such a lively, chaotic environment. Yet amid the celebration, something had already gone terribly wrong, though most attendees were completely unaware. A local teenager known for attending the festival every year. vanished in the middle of the afternoon. At first, authorities assumed the teenager had simply gotten lost in the crowds, a common occurrence at large gatherings. Parents frantically searched the streets, retracing every turn, every alley, but there was no sign. Security footage initially appeared to confirm the chaos of the festival had simply swallowed the teenager, showing only glimpses of the figure moving among a throng of people in colorful costumes. But as investigators reviewed the footage more carefully, a chilling truth began to emerge. The camera captured the teenager walking down a side alley, away from the main festival area. At first glance, it seemed innocent enough, a shortcut to the next street, a path frequently taken by attendees. But then a figure appeared, clad in a realistic zombie mask, stepping silently from the shadows. The figure followed the teenager for several seconds before making a sudden, deliberate move, guiding the teen further into the alley. No one in the crowd noticed what was happening. The streets were too crowded, the music too loud, the festival too distracting. By the time anyone realized something was wrong, the teenager had disappeared entirely, swallowed by the darkness of the side street. News of the disappearance spread quickly. Local law enforcement increased patrols around the festival, asking attendees to remain vigilant and report anything suspicious. Parents warned their children, and volunteers scoured every possible hiding place, from abandoned buildings to nearby wooded areas. The festival continued despite the fear, but the joyous energy had shifted. What had been a carefree celebration now carried a sense of caution, a lingering unease. Even for those who had not heard the news, there was an undercurrent of tension, a subtle change in the way people moved through the streets. The investigation revealed even more disturbing details. Police discovered that the side alley where the teenager vanished had long been known for strange occurrences. Over the years, there had been reports of theft, harassment, and other minor crimes that were often dismissed or attributed to the festival's rowdy atmosphere. What made this disappearance so terrifying was the realization that someone had taken advantage of the crowded, chaotic environment to execute a carefully planned act. This was no random incident. Someone had studied the festival, understood its rhythms, and exploited its very nature to carry out something far more sinister than anyone could have imagined. As night fell on the second day, the festival carried on, but the crowd was no longer just celebrating. There were whispers of fear, anxious glances toward dark corners, and a heightened awareness that something was lurking beneath the surface. The disappearance had transformed the festival from a playful, harmless gathering into a scene charged with tension and danger. What had started as a fun tradition was beginning to reveal its darker side, exposing vulnerabilities in the very heart of the town's most cherished event. Unseen and unnoticed, a predator had begun to operate within the chaos, and the town was only beginning to understand the threat that had arrived with the festivities. On the festival's final day, the town was buzzing with a strange mix of excitement and unease. The streets were filled with people in elaborate costumes, and yet there was a noticeable tension in the air. Rumors of the teenager's disappearance had spread throughout the community, leaving families on edge and law enforcement on high alert. Festival organizers tried to maintain a sense of normalcy, encouraging attendees to enjoy the final day, but the energy had shifted. Laughter and music still filled the streets, but every shadow, every darkened alley seemed to carry the weight of uncertainty. It was late afternoon when authorities received an anonymous tip about an abandoned storage unit on the outskirts of the festival grounds. Responding officers arrived cautiously, the normal sounds of celebration muffled behind the walls of the unit. Inside, they discovered a small, dimly lit room hidden behind stacked boxes and old crates. The room was arranged with meticulous care, though in a way that sent chills down anyone's spine. Torn clothing, personal items, and scattered props from previous festivals suggested that someone had been using the space for years. The sight was immediately disturbing, but the reality of what had occurred inside was even more horrifying. Investigators uncovered evidence that the missing teenager had been held there, along with items that belonged to other individuals who had vanished during past events. There were signs of confinement, makeshift restraints, barricaded doors, and disturbing arrangements of objects that suggested careful planning rather than random violence. Forensic experts documented every detail, photographing the scene and collecting samples that would later prove critical. The room revealed a level of premeditation that turned the festival's playful atmosphere into a scene of calculated terror. The discovery sent shockwaves through the community as it became clear that this was not an isolated incident, but the work of someone who had exploited the festival for their own sinister purposes over an extended period. The implications were staggering. The festival, long regarded as a safe space for celebration and creativity, had unknowingly provided cover for a predator. The combination of crowded streets, dim lighting, and theatrical chaos had created the perfect environment for someone to operate unnoticed. Attendees had unknowingly passed by the danger, completely unaware of the hidden horrors that had unfolded behind the scenes. Law enforcement now had to consider the possibility that other missing persons cases, some unsolved for years, might be connected to this single location and individual. As investigators continued to search the storage unit and surrounding areas, the festival itself became a haunting backdrop. Visitors who had been enjoying music and performances now walked through the streets with heightened awareness, noticing alleys and corners they had never paid attention to before. The town's sense of safety was shattered, replaced by a pervasive feeling of vulnerability. What had once been an event of creativity and community had transformed into a stark reminder of how easily appearances could mask danger. The discovery of the hidden room was only the beginning. Evidence suggested that the festival in all its chaos and energy had been used repeatedly as a stage for something horrifying, and the town was just starting to grasp the full scope of the crimes that had occurred right under its nose. The investigation that followed the discovery of the hidden storage unit quickly became one of the most complex and disturbing cases the local authorities had ever handled. Officers meticulously combed through hours of festival footage, reviewing every angle of crowded streets, alleyways, and side areas where the missing teenager had last been seen. They interviewed attendees, vendors, and festival staff, piecing together a timeline of the events leading up to the disappearance. Each detail, no matter how small, became crucial in understanding how the predator had operated in plain sight for so long. Forensic teams worked around the clock, analyzing the evidence collected from the storage unit. Every item, from torn clothing to personal effects, provided potential clues about the suspect's identity and methods. DNA samples were cross-referenced with missing persons databases, revealing connections that were both shocking and horrifying. Items recovered suggested that the perpetrator had been active not just during this year's festival, but over multiple years, using the chaos and crowds as a cover for their crimes. Investigators realized that this was not a spontaneous act of violence, but a carefully orchestrated series of offenses executed with chilling precision. The more authorities uncovered, the more unsettling the pattern became. The suspect had selected victims who were often alone or distracted, taking advantage of moments when festival-goers were immersed in the excitement and spectacle. The crowded streets, dimly lit alleys, and general chaos created the perfect environment for someone to move unnoticed. It was a methodical strategy, one that relied on observation, patience, and a detailed understanding of the festival's layout and rhythms. The scale of the planning suggested a level of cunning and patience that left investigators both impressed and horrified. As evidence continued to mount, law enforcement began to narrow in on potential suspects. They looked for individuals who had access to behind-the-scenes areas of the festival, people who understood the logistics, the flow of the crowds, and the security patterns. It was in this process that an unexpected lead emerged. DNA recovered from the storage unit matched a local employee involved in festival setup and operations. The revelation sent shockwaves through the town. This was someone trusted with the safety and management of the festival, a person responsible for ensuring the event ran smoothly and securely. Instead, they had been exploiting that very trust to carry out unspeakable acts. The arrest of the suspect marked a turning point in the investigation, but it also raised new questions. How long had these crimes been happening without detection? How many more victims might there have been? The community grappled with a mix of relief and fear, knowing the individual responsible had been someone so close to the heart of their beloved event. Authorities emphasized the importance of vigilance and began reviewing safety protocols for public gatherings, determined to prevent anything like this from happening again. The case revealed how deception, opportunity, and careful planning could transform a celebration into a crime scene, and how darkness could thrive in spaces meant for joy. The aftermath of the festival left the town reeling. The arrest of the suspect brought relief, but it also opened wounds that would take years to heal. Families of victims struggled with grief and anger, grappling with the realization that someone they had trusted had used the festival as a cover for horrifying crimes. The Florida Zombie Festival, once a symbol of creativity, fun, and community, had been irrevocably changed. The streets that had echoed with laughter and music now carried a haunting silence, a reminder of the darkness that had been lurking beneath the surface all along. Authorities worked tirelessly to ensure that no detail of the case went unexplored. Investigators continued to examine the storage unit and surrounding areas, searching for evidence that might reveal additional victims or shed light on the full extent of the crimes. Psychologists and counselors were brought in to support families and community members, helping them process the shock and trauma. For many, it was difficult to reconcile the vibrant, playful memories of the festival with the grim reality that had been uncovered. The town was left to confront the unsettling truth that evil can hide behind even the most familiar faces and most cherished traditions. The festival itself was permanently suspended. Streets that had once been filled with costumed revelers were now barricaded, and the preparations that had brought the community together were abandoned. Locals mourned the loss of an event that had been part of their lives for decades, but there was also a cautious recognition of the need for safety and accountability. Community meetings were held to discuss how to rebuild trust and create public spaces where people could gather without fear. Measures such as improved lighting, increased security, and more vigilant monitoring of public events were implemented, a tangible response to the lessons learned from the tragedy. The story of the Florida Zombie Festival became a cautionary tale, spreading beyond the town and reaching national attention. News outlets recounted the harrowing details, highlighting how a celebration had been transformed into a stage for crime and deception. Experts discussed the ways in which predators exploit crowded public events, emphasizing the importance of awareness and precaution. The festival's story served as both a warning and a lesson, illustrating how easily appearances can be deceiving and how critical it is to remain vigilant, even in spaces designed for joy. Years later, the memory of the festival lingered, both in the minds of those who had attended and in the collective consciousness of the town. Parents cautioned their children, residents reflected on what had happened, and the tale became part of local lore, a story told with both sorrow and caution. The Florida Zombie Festival was no longer just an annual event. It had become a symbol of the fragility of safety and the hidden dangers that can exist behind seemingly harmless fun. The town had survived, but it was forever changed, carrying with it the knowledge that even the brightest celebrations can conceal shadows, and that vigilance is the only safeguard against the darkness waiting just out of sight.